Good afternoon to everyone, and Assalamu alaikum. Today, last night, basically, I was in my room and uh, I was trying to understand a lot of issues of the central divisional areas of the Pakistan, that how the means of the mediums and the commodities of the Pakistanis, which are beyond the ostensible ownership rights of the same. This should have been understood by the Republicans themselves in their houses, in their official mandate, and in their public and private capacities as well. That today is the 4th of the July, and when I just observe the observations order, which I'm willing to fight my own self. When I observe these issues by myself, then things are very devastated with that fact as law. I confined with the rules of the resolutions in the Pakistan by having the opacity of the questions. I said that the opacity of the questions and the local residential and the commercial areas of the Pakistan. The prime social deflux issues in the Pakistan, which I observe by myself at law, under the subordinate point of the same effect thereafter. I just observe these issues by myself primarily when I just observe that the residency in the co-dependency and the co-accused as well. The question as to originating the capital in interest in the reverse packages appears to be the task manipulated tools in the Pakistan. The females these days become an open tool to get manipulated by the males. This is my landmark judicial outstanding question at law as well. The question as to understand the confinement of the females in the Pakistan is an absurd thought which I always just fight within my neurology. During the night time, I just want to observe these issues by myself as to rotate those issues. When I just observe the observation non-observation order of the Supreme Judicial Council via the High Court, while reading a lot of the federal statute from the years 2016 towards year 2022 and onwards. I'm totally outdated with that thinking at law. The critical observation of the law, in fact, appears to be the tool of observations in every judicial sector at law as well. The local residency of the Pakistan in the social defluxed valued positions are not in the mood to the assessment of the mode of reconciled types of the taxation culture in the Pakistan. They are not willing to file their returns in their circulatory tax to the State Bank of the Pakistan. The secondary question, which I just observed, that the State Bank of the Pakistan is not in the positions to observe the capital inherited statutory order of the same to abide by the same in fact. Thereby, I come with the conclusive judgment uh, data to the State Bank that the employers and the employees of the State Bank should have to be a very uh, reflects with the thoughts of the working domains of the international justice accounting methods. I said international justice accounting methods. When I just conclude these points, just the rules of the international cost effective accounting methods are not binding and are not enforced in the Pakistan, then I come up with the factors of the factory zone in the Pakistan and the commercial zone. When I just observe the commercial residential premises factories in the Pakistan, I come up with the another thought that the Pakistanis are doing. You can say that implied come residential plus commercial corrupt methods in the subdivisional areas of the Punjab, especially, and therefore it becomes an obvious thought for me to observe furthermore, and I do it. Thereby, the whole of the positions which the Pakistanis are doing for the bread and butter ascertainment in and out ways of the same. It's a question of the uh, observation points of the same. In fact, the females of the Pakistans are trying to have the modesty of the mode of assessment in the character assassinated men dominance 90%. I'm not taking it at the totality. Whereas when I just observe that the residential premises of the Pakistan are full of the lack of the confidential items, I come up with another point that the local special residency immigrants in the Pakistan are suffering from a lot of issues as well under the refugee laws, and therefore it becomes an obvious thought for me to be observant with the same. In fact, as to be very conversant with the same in the science of technology of the multimedia intellectual rights. The capacities of the individuals have differed from the ordinary solutions these days, and the public under the non-observation order of their physical rights. The interchangeable thoughts of the common commodities of the science and the mathematical equations of the non-observations in the science as well. The deferred payments of the capital inherited amount to the Supreme Judicial Council by the local residency is an outstanding judicial notice to the same in the remainder portion of the same. In fact, that which element led them into the contravention of the same. In fact, as taking the constitutional subject matter as a post litigant in interest representative of the Supreme Judicial Council, we have to be very reserved with ourselves in order to observe these conversant factors of the Republicans at fiscal constitutional default. So forth. The prime social circle zones in the Pakistan, after deducting of the a lot of the issues in the Pakistan, it becomes obvious that the sector of the private public entities are not willing to file their tax returns by Section 114, Clause 1, ITO, and Section 116, Clause 2, ITO, Income Tax Ordinance 2001, amended one and enforced one and applied one in Pakistan. Thereby, the Sales Tax Act 1990 applied in the Pakistan is also a statutory law which is applied in the Pakistan, but the individuals are not willing to admire the gross calculation of the same. In fact, thereby when you apply the federal excise law, the federal excise returns are also not being compiled by the moderators of the business enterprises in Pakistan. Therefore, when I just observe these consignment of the accounting methods, thereafter I come up with the conclusion that the chartered and cost management teams, the chartered accountants and the cost management teams, both of them are not in the positions to observe the fiscal negated figures in the intellectual obligations of the same, via the Section 20 of the NAB Ordinance, reporting of the suspicious activities under the Ordinance 1999 amended one as per the stature of the same, via the conversion of the Article 199 and Article 100 of the Constitution of the 1973 applied and enforced and amended one in Pakistan from now and then, as per my sweet will, under the sweet discretion of the judgment debtor of the Constitution of the Republic of the Pakistan. Thereby, I was basically investing this type of the capital in the gross observation of the rotation, in the circulation of the amounts of the public has checkered properties through the amounts devalued documentations. The documentations in the Pakistans are not in the positions to be observed by the remainder proportion in the secondary and the primary evidence via the Colonial Channel Order 1984 Amendment 1. Then I need to be a very compilatory legally with the observations of the rights of the same, in fact, and I have done that with my heart. The females of the Pakistan is a secondary question. The primary question is the facts and the figures, factual disobedience of the same fact. The question of the Republicans in the prime social telecasting shows appears to be the secondary point. When I just observe the telecasting shows with my own eyes, after articulating a lot of the articles of the Constitution under my dictum, I come up with another thought that the same telecasting shows are not confined to the consignment of the observation of the humanitarian negligence in the concurrence. I invented another term under the judicial teacher. This is my level. The question of the factual disobedience of the Pakistan as per the consideration of the legal doctrines of the not compiling of the methods of the accounts is another abuse process of critical thinking. When I just multiply those critical thinking, I come up with the next observation point that the females are being and were being harassed by the males in the Pakistan. And those females are not cost effective to anyone, and those females are cost negated. When I multiply the cost effective females with the cost negated females, I come up with another thought with my orthodox mentality. Yes, I know that why an orthodox mentality. Thereby, when I just confine those legal consignment with the application of the deterrence of the laws in the Pakistan, I come up with the secondary statement of the legal obligations that the students of the non-focalization and the focalization, both sectors under the Future Market Act 2016. I recommend all of them to have a keen eye over the Future Market Act 2016 applied and enforced in Pakistan, so they can be in the positions to observe the lacuna left by their parental neglect and the defection of the uh, methods of the non-observation rules and the critical observation as well as per my scientific approved statement with the electronic transaction ordinance 2002 applied and enforced one in the Pakistan and under the sweet bill of the GULRAIZ case. The question of the optimized, the doctrine of the necessity is not a solution to any point. And I'm not willing to understand the doctrine of necessity by any Pakistani and Indian in my judicial courtroom. Because the central point of the observations of the naturalization in the Pakistan is another obsessive and obsessive question which is not being entertained by the Pakistani in their houses. They have left the habit of observing the points of living in the accurate point of the execution of the rights to the same in fact and out of the wages and the remuneration the some part and the parcels of the females of the Pakistans are found as to working very hard in the public sector and having a very bad rotation of the earning. This is a question mark of the central litigation under the dictation of the same in fact. Thereby, I was basically legalizing the legislative enactment in order to understand the standing concurrence SROs by myself because of my hard work in the constitutional litigated legislative enactment in Pakistan. I'm trying hard in order to ascertain the true points of this same in fact because I observe the secondary and the primary factors of the Republicans are not in the both point of the consignment to get relocated with this sense of the wisdom under the ad sense. Yes, the sectors of the private capacities and the public private, both sectors are very deep rotten in the public sector. The students in the practical sectors and the private sectors and the multiplication of the population. I have written already a lot of articles over these points. I am the person in whole of the Pakistan who have written the law regarding the females' rights, and the Parliament and the Senate and the National Assembly of the Pakistan is trying to fight for the vote. I'm totally out of my senses when I observe that they are just fighting for the vote in order to have the uh, you say the entitlement. They're dying for having the entitlement. Despite of having the entitlement, they should have to work for the entitled documents for the reservations of the points of the public at large. But on the contrast, they are not in the point to reflect the public issues in the public sector. I said the concurrent politician and the operative applied politician in the Pakistan are not in the position to reflect the basic issues of the Pakistani in the public sector. They are in the public sector in order to abstain from the same, in fact, into the adverse lines of declined and deferred positions. And as a constitutional advocate, I always observe these points that the females' veracities and the females' testimonials. These two points also differs a lot. Why I always raise my voice over the females because I obsess and I feel obsessive with these points that the females of the Pakistan are and were suffering from the multiplication of the populace of males. And the males and the men dominance in the Pakistan is never been in the positions to observe the concurrent standing position of the females under the defection of the same at large. The question of the defection of the females clause in the Pakistan is not a permanent zone of divisional points of the ascertainment of the rights in the point of perfection as per my observation of the lines of the civil administration of the justice. The question regards with the civil administration of the justice in the judicial side is an apparent tune which is not being observed by anyone. And you have to be very cautious to observe the civil administrative rights by yourself in any sector of the law. When I just applied the constitutional article 199, I come up with the thought that the affidavit in the personam capacities are outdated. When I just observed the outdated affidavits, the individuals had and have been deceased under the uh, intestate capacities. When I just applied to observe the intestate capacities of the individuals under the subordinate points of their working domains, I come up with the next thought that they same in fact have no point of principal business active activities. You can say that the active taxpayer limits and the non-active taxpayer limits. So the question always take a firm stand over the relation of the same in fact that when I just applied to understand the property rights of the Pakistanis, I come up with the thought that the same are not in the point to have the proper tenancy or tenant at will. This is a civil term which should have been acknowledged by the same Republican at civil defection clause that why the same are not willing to understand that the civil administration and the civil rights of the same is not in the point to have the right of the capacitated thought of the Pakistani. When I'm a Pakistani, I'm proud of it. And then why the Pakistanis are not being proud of themselves? Because of their lack of social, scientific, low self-esteem in their character assassinated houses and offices. I always ask on the face of record that if the females of the Pakistan are and were being suffered by the local residency, thereafter which sector and which factors are in the sectors of non-compilatory observation of the method of the law. In fact, I observe these points under the physics of the normalacy of the technocratic dissolved matter of the same. In fact, the question of the section 20, I come up with the same thought that I have raised that question of section 20, reporting of the suspicious activities by the NAB, Ordinance 1999, Amended 1 and Applied 1 in the Pakistan especially, and by the FIA rules converted into the Article 184, Clause 1, Sub-Clause 2 and Clause 3 of 1973 Amended 1. That if any individual who is profound to have multiple bank accounts and having multiple banking transactions and are originating and were found as to originating multiple resources while mobilizing the governance factors and sectors and elements of the same, and he or she is not as willing to extend that thought that the same subjected question of the multiple black incomes into conversion of the white incomes, and those white incomes is subjected under my writ petition, my question of litigation. The question of the writ petition is not a question in my code of judicial site inside myself. Wherever I said I stand, that becomes an automated judicial code of the law, applied justice, an operative one. Because of my intellectual, superficial, scientific proof, judgment, narrative facts to the same, the Pakistanis, I observe that the 95% of the same, in fact, is a subjected, negated scientific dissolved material in the Pakistan. When I'm not willing to, let's suppose it, when I'm not willing to extend myself beyond a reasonable sense of wisdom. I'm not willing to extend myself in order to abstain from the major sins. And when I'm not myself is not willing to abstain from the major sin, then who is and where from does the other person is and where trying to safeguard itself is a question of the lowest self-esteem into the high conversion of the same. And thereby, when I just dictate myself in the American language, it means that the British language lost the credibility of under subordinated fact of the same. In fact, that the question of the physical capabilities of a person always depend on the performance of the intellectual understanding of the same in the lines of observation of the facts into the reserve points of the science as well. I'm always enjoying myself. Whether the Republic are dying for the bread and butter, I also fight for the same. So the public is also very conversant with the facts of the law in the fact adverse fact as well. The question of the technocratic solution in the Pakistan is not appealing to anyone because of the lack of the working of observation of the rights of the same and observing the right in practical life. Under the sanction of the governance applied one is not applied and understood by anyone in Pakistan. 95% of them are out of the modesty of the journal clauses, adaptation laws, and the application of the rules and the regulation precedents of the normal issue of the dependent under the customary precedent in the criminal activities. Principle 1 always deferred in the judicial administrative laws. Obligation of the same is not a question in the Lahore divisional benches, but when we just observe the subdivisional areas, the limited territories of the same are subjected with the heinous crimes. And these days, the criminals are not only the heinous criminal, the criminals have subjected with a lot of the subjected and non-subjected matter of the mandate, official and the non-official, and the other one as well. The females and the males, both sectors are fighting for the bread and butter, despite of acknowledging that they are fighting for the bread and butter in their public capacity. The both factors are trying to convince the other that they are not fighting for the bread and butter. The residential premises areas of the Pakistan and the local and the guardian ad litem cases. The concept of the guardian ad litem cases and the de facto guardian in the Pakistan is another expressive element which is not being observed by any Pakistani beyond the ostensible means. I said ostensible means. The Pakistanis are not willing to understand any Pakistani itself. They are willing to extend their thoughts to the other side, and the other side is not willing to extend the thoughts of the next one, and the third one is not extending the both sides to merge the one judgment in perfection. The concept of the judgment narrative facts of the Pakistani is a question which I just always pose by myself as to observing myself in the proper lines of the observation of my high self-esteem, because I dictate myself every night and every day by reading the law statute from 20 years now. So I was basically born a law reformed individual or lawfully reformed individual. Whereas when I just reflects the public sector while observing the public deterrence, while observing their consignment of negligence and trying to have the abbreviation of their deferred payments. They always deferred from the payments. They always deferred in the relations. They consigned with the constitutional abrogative functioning, and they reflects the constitutional abrogated enactment in my court of judicial administration that they were not abiding the laws in the confinement of the rule of precedence. I am saluting myself for my own virtual victories, which I am just confining with the fact of observation. I'm the person who is doing multiple task management by myself. I'm myself investing these things, but the public is not in the positions to observe beyond the eating and sleeping rotations. Totally out of my head. When I myself is not willing to understand my issues, then who is going to solve the issues of the others? Is a question which could not be reconciled by anyone. The females are in the positions to be double decade if with underage, and such females are not having the proper earnings and proper penetrated amounts, and those females are trying very hard to have the relationships. But the males like me, which are very perfect in their life, above average. When a person who become above average, same person is not willing to have any female, because the high self-esteem of the same subjected question always tend to fold the same low self-esteem females because of his own acknowledgement of the deferred amount of the female's reproductive low birth ratio by the parent defected material under the capitalistic Islam. They are found in this offense as well. When I just raised my slogan of the Islamic hierarchies in the Pakistan, the most of the individuals become my enemy, the capital enemy. They never observe that the minus capital enemies, and I never reserve those thoughts to get remunerated by the same. In fact, thereby it is an obligatory fact that I just always speak in this speaking order. despite of observing the same, because I observe the same, the much and the more. The more and the much is the toughest job, which I just keep with the pace. And the females of these days, which are rotating to have the sexual illicit activities and having the ultimate aggressive children in their houses, giving the mobiles in their hands, and those individuals, those children are not in the perfection of reading and educating their souls, and such children are trying to rotate with the same bad habits. So these are the some issues which are the Pakistani Republican issues, which I just drawn under the Article 184 clause 1, 2, and 3. While the Article 199 negated, the Article 199 negated these all the defection clauses. When I just observed in Article 199 defection clauses, I observed those issues are not being reserved by any third party or second party, but the fictitious parties are being delivered in the output paper charts out of the subordinate courts to the higher courts, and the Lahore High Court is in the some moderate lines of the observations to the facts, and then the question of the observing the facts of the child female birth ratio in Pakistan is 7:1, 7 females over 1 male. So what to expect out of the same is the question now. When a city and a country which is suffering from the male reproduction growth rate, and the females are much in the quantity, and such females whether be educated or not is not a question. The question remains very solved, and under the insolvency of the men dominance, that the men dominance in Pakistan after get married, in especially in the insolvency factors, always have the point of the reserves amounts of the females banks, and those females always never rotate, never pose via the Article 199 to report Section 20, reporting of the suspicious activities via the NAB Ordinance 1999, even after the telecasting observation shows. So that's all for today. Stay blessed. This is Edward Quaid to Race King, and all copyrights of this video is are were being protected with the Advocate Gulraiz King under the Copyrights Ordinance 1962, along with the International Copyrights Ordinance 1968, with effect to the Electronic Transaction Ordinance 2002, Section 2, Clause N, and Section 2, Clause M, within the whole of the globe. This is the level of the constitutional advocate. So